Hey guys, I'm back with a new video. What we're going to be talking about today, again, a little bit of that hybrid. We'll talk about a beer style as well as go into a dissection of it. So today we're going to talk about porter. I have broached this a little bit on my Guinness video, and anytime you talk about any type of dark ale, a lot of time it's derived back to the porter style of beer, so that sounds familiar. You've probably seen a couple of my other videos. What we're going to be tasting today is kind of a pretty traditional, porter in the United States called Founders Porter. Founders is out of Michigan. I think they've been bought out by AB InBev a handful of years ago. They're still producing good beers. They have a breakfast stout. They got a bunch of other beers that are pretty famous. And I've never had this, believe it or not, with all the beer consumption I've done over the years. I've never actually had Founders. So this is actually going to be quite new for me. I like sometimes to filter in these commercial styles as well as all these local, great local microbreweries that we have in the area here too. So let me just bring up a few things about porter again. Like I said, in the 1700s, porter became very famous and I'm going to sometimes interchange English and Irish and, we'll say United Kingdom, Great Britain, whatever you want to say about the porter style of beer. But it originally was being brewed with a brown malt. And the reason why I got the name porter was that they found that the working class that was moving goods through London and the area were porters, and they seemed to take a liking to it. Originally it was brewed with brown malt in the early 1700s, and the interesting thing is it was put into wooden casks back then. And, so old 1700s porter tastes nothing like porter today. You may have heard something called three threads. They would put them in these casks, and unfortunately it would take, well, fortunately and unfortunately, at the time they didn't know what was going on, but it was taking on some lactobacillus. And so the beer probably had a little bit more, and I say probably, obviously I wasn't living then, but from all the historians that I read about, had a little more acidity to the beer, Brettanomyces type of character, which is like a earthy barnyard horse blanket. Doesn't sound very pleasant. In some styles it sounds okay, but since it was being, cask conditioned, and cask ales obviously were very big, are still pretty big in the UK now, even though not as much as back in the days. The bartender or mixer, whatever you want to call them, they would draw beer from a new cask and a very old cask and like middle range, and they sometimes from three casks, and they would call it three threads. So as time went on in the 1700s, and they were using this brown malt, and it had a little bit of a smoky quality too because kilning was done over open flames. They were realizing that the hydrometer came out. A hydrometer is a tool that we put into wort or beer, and we kind of measure how much solutes are in the beer, and the difference from the time it comes out from the boil to the time it's done fermenting kind of gives us a range of what the alcohol percentage was. So they figured out that they weren't utilizing that brown malt very well. They realized that they would use the pale malt that would utilize a lot more sugar, so they weren't wasting as much money. And around the same time, I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit, Daniel Wheeler, I think it was 1817, I may be mixing that up. He came out with the roasting drum. You may have heard me say this in the stout video. And he was able to kind of make darker roasts and then mix it with the two roasts. So they were able to be a lot more efficient with making porter style of beers and yielding a lot more. Okay, so I talk more about that, I think, in the Guinness stout video. The big difference between, so let me just back up again. So through the 1700s, porter was pretty popular, and then there was a stout porter, and then the stout style came from there. But it started dying out as time went on, and get through the 1800s and 1900s, and then kind of got revitalized a little bit in the American craft beer industry in the late 70s, because again, you may have heard from another video of mine that we only had English textbooks, or that was the most popular textbooks, and we would derive a lot of our recipes from there, and porter kind of grabbed on in the American home brewing and craft brewing industry. American porter versus, say, an English porter, you know, in the United States, we seem to always want to add a little bit more. We want to add more roast to it. So we add more grains. We add more specialty grains. We usually boost up the alcoholic percentage. The one today I have is about 6.5%. English beers were, you know, more like 3 to 4% alcohol, even to this day, because of taxation reasons. The IBUs on this one today is about 45. So that, remember, international bitterness units. So, you know, it has a little more bitterness, more hop. It's probably going to have a lot more hop aroma. So we kind of amp things up in the U.S. When it comes to that. So again, you know, I'm going to call this an American porter, but, you know, we always have to go back to the British porter, you know, history, and then became stout porters because stout was stronger, and then we went through this 1800s, 1800s, and again it kind of got revitalized in the 1980s. So let's open up this beer. So we got Founders Porter again. Just kind of show you the label. Founders has a bunch of ones. They have like I said, a breakfast stout, which is very popular. They make a lot of IPAs. So this isn't, you know, this is not the only style of beer that they do. All right, so let's like I do most of the time, I like my tulip glass. Okay, let's kind of get this thing opened. Okay. All right, so let's pour this bad boy in here. So again, with the porter, you know, some people will ask, you know, let me show you this, and I'll finish that thought in a second here. So look at that. We got a nice beige, light brown head. You know, I didn't pour it to quite that, you know, inch thickness. Kind of, usually it's, you know, dark brown to almost black, which this is kind of holding true. With porter and stout, you know, someone says, well, what's the big difference? There isn't a lot of discrepancy between the two styles. In homebrewing, when I was kind of going through the ranks of homebrewing years ago, you know, some people will say that the use of roasted barley is the big differentiating thing between stout using roasted barley and porter not. You know, as I've told a few times through my videos that I'm, you know, studying to become a, you know, certified Cicerone. I've done the written test, and I've told you about the tasting that hopefully is forthcoming in the spring. That they will, you know, you'll learn about all these, different styles, and you know, you learn about, you know, roasted barley being used a lot in stouts. But like I was about to mention, is that there isn't that big of a difference. They both usually are using some type of chocolate malt, crystal malt, to add color. Stouts typically will have roasted barley, but back in, you know, during the history, that wasn't necessarily something that really differentiated the style. And there's guidelines. I told you the BJCP guidelines, the Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines, but and they'll mention roasted barley, but it's really not a, you know, draw a line in the sand, you know, and if you cross it and you're in roasted barley territory, it's a stout and no roasted barley. That's just more of something that's usually, you'll see in more of the recipes with stouts, that there's some use of roasted barley, which gives it some color. Roast or black patent malt sometimes will give you that espresso type of flavor. That's usually a little more roasted than the porter will be, in my opinion. However, you buy a million different porters. Some will have more roast to it, like espresso, chocolate, toffee. Some will be a little bit more subdued than that. Okay, so let's get back into this. Yeah, so, you know, that's exactly what you get with this. You know, you definitely get chocolate. Yeah, a little bit heavier than that Schwartz beer. You know, you definitely get a light roast. You almost get kind of like a rum-soaked, like dark fruit type of smell. But really the chocolate, you know, bittersweet chocolate smell. You know, light coffee, espresso. And that's what you'd want with a porter. Okay, so let's take a sip. And again, so similar to the aroma, You get that light to medium roasted coffee, chocolate, nutty. You get some maybe like hazelnut, maybe almond, roasted kind of nuts if you ever roasted them on the pan and tasted them. It's actually medium kind of carbonated. It's got a nice mouthfeel, kind of full, mouthfeel. I didn't mention much about the hops. This like a stout isn't going to be really, American porter will have a little more hop character to it than English porter, but, hops aren't going to dominate here, but I do get a little herbal, floral kind of character to it, but I definitely get the chocolate and the nuttiness a lot more than anything else. But yeah, you get that chocolatey, dark fruit, chocolate covered, whatever fruit you want to say, because of that dark fruit character. There's not much really alcoholic warmth here. It actually sits pretty smoothly on my tongue, and at, what did I say, 6.5%. We are starting to approach that. Sometimes around 7% is when I start getting a little bit more of that hit. A little less, the mouthfeel is definitely, this is not nitrogenated. So, the mouthfeel is a lot lighter body than, say, a Guinness or typical stouts. And that's the other thing. I always found when I would use roasted barley in my stouts, it would kind of give a little bit more of a thicker mouthfeel to it than a lot of my porters. But that's not really a written rule, like I said before. But this bottle, I gotta see, I need my glasses to see the bottling date. I think this is starting to, get a little shift to it. Oh yeah, this was bottled this was about 7-8 months ago. Pushing, what is it? Actually, February, March of, I guess late February. I can't see the last number there of this year, so it's getting a little bit older. So that's why I say I kind of taste a little bit of not as much of that sharp malt profile. You get kind of like a little bit of a malt shift, kind of like a more deeper caramel butter, Scotch. Not oxidized. I don't get that papery taste from oxidation. I could tell it's not the freshest, but as long as it's been refrigerated, a lot of times people aren't going to know the difference. But I just noticed that now as I'm looking at it. But overall, I'm just going to pour another little bit here. Okay. So dark. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, quality porter. I mean, mine is probably a little aged. If it was a few more months fresher, it'd probably be okay. I'm probably getting away with it a little bit because it is a darker style beer. If then, say, like a Kolsch or International Pale Lager or things like that. So definitely a beer. I think most of you, if you do love porters and you're watching this, you probably have had this before. You probably had their other stouts that Founders makes. And it is definitely quality beer. I just think maybe the one I have is just kind of 2 or 3 months old, but I would definitely purchase this again. Just be, careful on where I'm getting it from to make sure that it's ideal. But it's still very drinkable, very enjoyable. Chocolate, light roast, medium body, slight creaminess on the end. Back end gives you that bittersweet chocolate. And that's it. So guys, hopefully, you guys enjoy a little bit of the history of porter. I try to dive in a little bit without kind of going over the top. Even though at times I have a gift for the gab and I will go on and on about it. But so Founders Porter, this is their traditional porter. I think they make a few other varieties of it. Definitely I would recommend it. And especially if you like darker style of beers. And it's really actually not, there's not a lot of residual sweetness to it. So you kind of get a little bit of sweetness, but it's not real cloying, and it is pretty easy to to take in without feeling like you're being kind of overwhelmed with it. Pairings with this, light beef dishes, medium light deep beef dishes, chicken, maybe some grilled chicken, some barbecue. It may actually do very well with some spicy dishes because like a cream stout would, sometimes porters will kind of tame the spiciness from the food a little bit and the hotness from, say, wings or chicken wings like that. So I wouldn't shy away from a beer like this with something like spicy. Remember, IPAs aren't great with spicy food unless you really want a big increase in the amount of spiciness and heat from the capsaicin from the chilies. Dessert-wise, again, something with chocolate may be a little bit too close of a match. I always like these darker beers and stouts and cream stouts to go with kind of fruit or like panna cotta or creme brulee or things like that that I think go. Or just sip it by the fire and just enjoy it there, which I do with most of my beers anyway. All right, guys, so a little bit porter history, like I said, and beer dissection of Founders Porter. Hopefully you try it one day, and until next time, I will be back with you guys soon. Take care. Have a good day.